Welcome to Belpod, the podcast for all those with an interest in Belarusian football. In this episode, we'll take a look at some of the facts and figures behind the new salary cap introduced by the ABFF last week. We'll also elaborate on some murky goings-on as discussions continue about a replacement for Gorodea in next season's BPL, before taking you on a tour through some of the league's lesser lights and how they're shaping up for the start of the new campaign. We'll finish with more transfer news and why we think Torpedo Belage might just warrant serious consideration in this season's title race discussions.
Hello and welcome back to the second episode of Belpod. And we thought we'd start with the story that we covered 2 weeks ago, but which really came to fruition. The story that we were rumouring was going to happen 2 weeks ago. It really became a bit more concrete, didn't it, John, last week with the meeting of the ABFF, the issue of the salary cap.
Yes, Liam, that's right. Hello. It's been agreed now, and I think it was on Tribuna at the end of last week, the documents detailing the salary cap that the clubs have signed up to. So it's quite interesting, the money involved. The maximum wage you can earn as a professional footballer in Belarus now is £4,300 a month. Now, in order to qualify for that money, you need to be a full international and, a regular in the national team. So only a few guys will be earning that sort of money. As far as the managers are concerned, the maximum a manager can earn, and this is your Yuri Puntises and Leonid Kuchuks, £2,300 a month. The bonuses, $8,500 for a win in the championship, $6,000 for a win in the cup, $17,000 minimum for a win in a European competition. So those are the salary caps that the teams have signed up to. But of course, most of the teams won't be paying anything like that money. And those teams, the top 3 or 4 that are capable of paying bigger wages than this, have already agreed those wages with the players and got those deals signed off before the salary cap comes into effect. So there's less money in the game, as we said in the first episode. And I wanted to read to you, actually, Liam. I read this just before we started recording. It's the chairman of FC Minsk, who we were slating last time, Igor Shloido, and he's quoted as saying this at the meeting: "We need to fundamentally reconsider the principles on which our football economy is built. It is clear that we need to develop a concept for the sport in the near future. We have to use money even more rationally. I agree with the general opinion that it is necessary to focus more on children's football and trust our players more." And he also goes on to say that only foreigners who are worthy, i.e. of a high standing, should be invited to play in Belarus in the future. So Mr. Shloido, I think, identifies a clear direction of travel that we've seen some clubs moving in already, which is a focus on youth football, on children's football, on redesigning the whole route map of the game from a young kid to a full international. So it's really quite interesting. It's not just about the money, it's about the way in which the game is organised in the country,
There's certainly that rule, isn't there? There's been suggesting about, limiters, they call it. That's the translation that I get offered anyway, limiters, in the sense that in increased participation, there's a certain rules around how many young players from Belarus have to be included in each squad, isn't there, if I remember right?
I mean, that will mean more game time for youngsters like Lozhkin and Dynamo Minsk, who we were mentioning last week. Also, some of the younger guys who are coming through at other clubs, they're going to get more game time in the next season or two. And that can only be good for the country's national team, provided the level of the championship holds up with the salary cap in place.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we were talking about an off-field development here. The pre-season has kicked off good and proper, and I'm not a huge fan of pre-season, to be honest. I don't pay too much attention to friendlies. But from my perspective as an energetic fan, I'm actually quite interested to see what happens in the next couple of games, because there does seem to be a lot of uncertainty in terms of squads. Some squads are quite settled and players are being added. I've no idea what's going on at Energetic, to be honest. They've signed one player so far. It's a slightly nervous time, I think, as an Energetic fan. But I have to remind myself that this time last year, probably no Energetic fan had heard of Yakshiboev or anyone like that. And certainly Tway wasn't a crucial part of the team from the previous season and really emerged as a star performer last season. So, yeah, there's a lot to be decided. And hopefully Energetic, as they have done in the past, will find a few Kazakh diamonds or whatever, and or Uzbeki stars, and pull that off. But yeah, generally, I'm not that interested in pre-season. But the one thing about pre-season is that it does herald it comes before the season, and now we know when the season's going to happen, which is interesting in itself, isn't it, John? Because there appear to be 28 scheduled weeks. But what do we think about that?
Well, it's vague. You can also read it as 30 match days, and the question of how many teams will be in the top flight is very much open. There's been a huge debate erupted on the Belarusian portals in the last couple of days. Essentially, Gorodia, as we all know, are bankrupt and disbanded. That leaves a gap in the top league. And according to the ABFF's own rules, that gap should be filled by Krumkaki, the Minsk privately owned team, who were associated with the opposition and protest movements last summer and with their pro-democratic stance. The ABFF have made it clear to Krumkaki that they will not be promoted, that their only possibility to be promoted was to beat Slutsk in the playoff, and of course they failed to do that. Now, nowhere in the rules does it say that if a team loses a playoff, then it is disbarred from promotion if one of the top flight subsequently go bankrupt. The ABFF, in its infinite wisdom, have settled on promoting Arsenal Dzerzhinsk, who are a new team founded in 2018, bankrolled apparently by many foreign businessmen as well as the local executive. But Arsenal Dzerzhinsk are fighting shy and saying, we don't want promotion. We're applying for licensing to play in the Vysheyshaya Liga, the second tier, next season, which leaves the ABFF looking a bit silly, because if Arsenal refuse, then we're looking at Lokomotiv Gomel or Smorgon, two small teams who make Smolovici, the late Smolovici, look like Real Madrid in comparison. They're tiny and they don't have the infrastructure to compete at the top level. Justice says that Krumkaki should be promoted, but politics of the country and the political stance that they've taken probably means that the ABFF will disbar them. Now, if that's the case, then surely the sensible thing to do, leaving aside the injustice of that decision, is to run with a 15-team league. It's like, well, okay, it's not ideal for one team on 2 Saturdays during the course of a season, but that's normal. The ABFF will also claim precedence in that, apparently, according to Nikolai Kadasevich, in the 2012 season, the long-defunct Partizan Minsk beat Vitebsk in the relegation playoff and then went bust and vanished. And in that case, Vitebsk were not allowed promotion, and the top league ran with 11 teams that season. So if there really is a stink kicked up and Arsenal refuse promotion, then probably they'll run with 15 teams. But isn't it ludicrous? You know, we're 4 or 5 weeks out from the beginning of the season and we still don't know the final lineup either of the top league or of the second tier as well.
I find quite bizarre about this as well is that surely the easiest way to avoid this, if they want an even number of teams, is just not to relegate Belshina. Why don't they just leave Belshina in the BPL? I mean, ultimately, if they do that, it would seem that no team from the Vysheyshaya League can complain about that. But rather than stick with Belshina and keep it at 16, just not relegate them, I'm sure Belshina would lap up that opportunity. They'd rather actually make a really clear point of not allowing Krumkaki to go up, and thus, to me, opening up a can of worms. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's almost like, as you say, they're determined to make a point. And what point? And obviously, Dulib, the new coach, has come out recently with some fairly pro-democracy comments, so clearly that's stirred the pot a bit more, and they're absolutely hell-bent on stopping Krumkachi from being promoted. But ultimately the season's going to kick off anyway. We know the season's going to kick off on the 3rd of March, don't we? So that's good news. We know we're going to see some football. The 9th of March, the 3rd of March is the Super Cup. The 9th of March is the quarterfinals of the Belarusian Cup. And we will have league matches, either 8 league matches or 7 league matches on the 16th of March, which is something to look forward to, is it not? That's the main thing.
That's right. It is just worth saying before we move on, we're not dealing with David Dean or Ted Craker here from the old FA guys. We're dealing with ex-military officers who are running the ABFF as clients of the current president and political authorities. So they're absolutely loyal to the current government. And given that Krumkachi have come out with such a strong pro-democratic and pro-opposition stance and everything that they've said and done since the middle of last season, then clearly, there's a determination to prevent them winning promotion this season.
The bouncers are on the door. It's our club and you're not coming in, basically. Anyway, we'll move on. 2 teams that are definitely coming up from the Vysheyshaya Liga to join the party, the BPL party. Differing situations for these 2 teams as well. Obviously, one of the teams, Sputnik, we didn't think they were going to be joining the party. We thought just a few weeks ago, did we not, that it was all over for them. They appeared not to be able to take up their place. Interestingly as well, I mean, we also thought initially, didn't we, that it was just a very, very new team, another one of these boom to bust teams, but actually formed a long time ago in 1952, you mentioned earlier. So it is a team with some history. Yeah. That team went bust. A new team took its place in the same stadium as the previous team had played in. So there is some. It would have been a shame if we'd lost a team which is essentially 68 years old. But they are going to go into action, it would seem, and that's mainly down to a similar sort of arrangement that Gorodeya had with Shakhtar last year.
Yeah, I mean, everything about this team says they'll be this season's Smolovici. They're going to exist to provide game time to the players of other clubs, and that's a real pity. But I think when it looked likely that Sputnik would go bankrupt, the association actually in this case stepped in and had a conversation with the regional executive committee in Gomel region where Rekets are based. And I think they ensured that money would be made available to have the team play in the league. And there's news emerged today that, as you say, Liam, they're going to be a partner club rather than a farm club of Shakhtar. So Shakhtar's players who are not getting near the first team will go and play for Sputnik and get game time there. So that really works out for everybody.
And by contrast, Gomel appear to have been splashing the cash to a certain extent. So we're not talking Shakhtar proportions here, but Gomel have been signing some fairly hefty names, haven't they, in their bid to stabilise in the BPL.
Well, they have, and of course, Gomel are backed by a very important oligarch in Belarus. There's also some major companies based in Gomel that provide money to support the team. I was reading that Belarus Neft, who are the sort of state-owned petrol company, provided $3 million. And initially we thought that was all for Gomel. It's like, that's a huge budget. But in fact, it's for Gomel, Sputnik, and Slavia Mozar, who are all teams from the southeast of Belarus, and they're going to share the money that Belarus Neft have made available. So Gomel have signed some interesting players. Andrei Solovey, who was the top scorer in the Vysheyshaya Liga last season, I think 21 goals in 24 games for city rivals Lokomotiv. They've signed the boy Igor Kuzmenok from Izloch, regular player for Izloch, sort of very good defender, come defensive midfielder, I think. They've introduced a couple of signings today. Igor Kostrov, who was at Slavia for 5 years, well over 100 appearances for them, and a guy, I don't know him, Vadim Pobedey from Zhetsu in Kazakhstan, who are all floating a lot of Belarusian players at the moment. So they are signing a lot of people. And of course, Gomel are a big club in Belarusian football. If you recognise that Gomel is the second city in the country, then the equivalent of Gomel in England is probably Aston Villa. who, have had their spells in the second tier in the last 20 years, but are a big historical club. And I think Gomel have that sort of profile in Belarus. And I expect them, with the squad they're putting together and under the coaching of Igor Bionchik, the manager, I expect there'll be a decent mid-table this season. I don't see them being bothered by relegation at all. I can't say the same for Sputnik, I'm afraid.
Interestingly as well, of course, I mean, anybody who's looked at a map of Belarus will have noticed that we now have, in the southeast of the country, as you just mentioned, we now have 3 teams. Last year, Slavia and Moza had it all to themselves. Really, they were the only team for miles around in the BPL, and they've now been joined, as you say, by both Sputnik, who's on the outskirts of the outskirts in Belarusian terms, anyway, about 50 kilometers, I think, away from Gomel. So 3 teams in the southeast vying for supremacy, and you think Gomel will be the best of the 3? Do you? I certainly think, looking at Slavia again, they seem to be perhaps mindful of the sort of FC Minsk mantra that was being mentioned earlier on. Certainly spending their money wisely and not splashing much cash. And also, interestingly, just recently signed a Bahraini footballer, which must be a first, surely, for the BPL.
The first Bahraini stroke Saudi dual national in the Belarusian league, at least in the last 12 months. Ali Nasser Ali Hassan, who's apparently a midfielder and hasn't played at too high a level, but they've obviously brought him in as maybe one for the future. I think this is an important season, Liam, for Slavia coach Mikhail Martinovic. They're quite a well-to-do club. They're backed by the joint stock company that owns Mozer Refinery, which is a really important oil refinery, not just in Belarus, but in the whole of sort of Eastern Europe. It's very strategically important. And they've really backed Martinovic. But if you remember last season, Slavia were a mess most weekends, particularly defensively. I had a real soft spot for them, actually, as they were so entertaining to watch. And on their day, they were a very good side. I mean, don't forget, they beat Bata, I think, twice in 3 games at the beginning of the season and drew up at the Borisov Arena. But then you remember that game they played against Energetic. I can't really remember a more inept performance in the whole of last season. Energetic won 5-0, going on 8-9-0. And Slavia just looked like they couldn't be bothered that day. So they're a really inconsistent team. And I think with the money that's been made available, Martinovic has to show some sort of improvement and at least push them into mid-table. He never seemed to work out what his best team was, or what his best formation was, or what the team's identity was. So I think he's under a bit of pressure this season.
Interesting, because I mean, yeah, as you say, I mean, they have got some wealthy backers. Certainly, there was some money spent last year. But I don't see that this year. So maybe there has been a sort of sense of, well, we spent all that money last year. You did too much with it. I think obviously we like Francis Nala, don't we? I think he's a good player. Again, one of those ones like some of the players at Energetic that I feel are the better players. Were what's going on? Is he? We'll need to wait for a few more pre-seasons games to see if he's still there. I know they've re-signed Dennis Tete, who again, he kind of epitomises Slavia for me. On his day, brilliant, but too often really off the pace. So yeah, they need to be more consistent. You're right. I'm not sure, as I say, whether maybe the purse strings are slightly less generous this year than they were last year. But I haven't seen anything that makes me feel that they're going to be pushing for any more than mid-table.
Yeah. But Nard, I think, is a wonderful player in his day. Tete, for me, had a very quiet season last year. Apparently, he's a local legend in Mozer and does a lot of work helping people and charitable work. So he's very popular in the city. But yeah, he'd a quiet term last year. And it was a team full of characters, a team, the Nedishkovskis and so forth, real players you remember. But yeah, they just didn't gel at all. And I think we need to see some progress there, really.
So this is obviously we tend to think that most of the BPL is centered around Minsk, and certainly there is a lot of activity in the Minsk area, and Borisov not being far north, and Torpedo not being far north in terms of in Belarusian terms as always, and Shakhtar not far to the south. But we do also have other footballing outposts on the western side. Of course, we have both Neman and Dinamo and Ruk. But we thought we'd talk a little bit now about another team that's really in the middle of nowhere, and that's Vitebsk. I think, obviously, as is often the case in other parts of the world, if you are in the middle of nowhere, you tend to be drawing quite a large fan base, don't you? And certainly, I think Vitebsk had the most eye-catching shirt of last year, with one of the best stories. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that was the shirt based on a painting by Kazimir Malevich made in Vitebsk 100 years ago. And one of the Vitebsk centre halves at the time, Daniel Chalov, who runs a Russian fashion label called Nichigo Obichnigo, he and his colleagues worked with the local museum to make a shirt based on this painting, which is an extraordinary story, really. Vitebsk is a very important city in the history of art, not just in Belarus, but in the whole broader post-Soviet region. Anyway, Chalov's gone. They liked his shirt so much they released him in the last few weeks. Poor man. But I'm sure he's gone back to a club in Russia to be nearer to his business, maybe. I don't know where he's going. They've also got rid of Artem Gurenko, which quite surprised me, the winger. He scored one of the best goals of last season for me, a wonderful chip against Slavia, a game that ultimately Slavia won 3-2. But that's one of the best goals I saw last season. They also have got Diego Santos back, the sort of maverick Brazilian forward. He's a real box of tricks, a real handful to face. He seems to be back there after a bizarre sort of 10, 12 games at Shakhtar, and Shakhtar have clearly decided not to pursue his signature, so he's back at Vitebsk. Vitebsk have brought in a few guys from around the league, no big names standing out. They brought in a Serbian centre forward called Branko Mihailovic from Matchva. That'll be an interesting signing. And of course, they've got a new manager, Evgeny Chernyukin, who was Olszewski's assistant at Bata. Before that, he helped Sergei Yazinski at Vitebsk for many years, the previous manager, who's now managing Belarus's under-21s. So it's going to be a new identity for the club, I think, again, focusing on younger players. And we'll see how that works out for them. We keep trying to, so people can understand who haven't delved into the league maybe quite as much as you and I. Vitebsk remind me a bit of St Johnstone. They're a kind of a one club town, sorry. And they're moderately successful, but never going to be challenging regularly for the league and Europe. They're the club that occasionally reaches the cup final once a decade, that sort of side. But you're right, a bit like Slavia, they've a very large and very noisy fan base. And I love watching games at Vitebsk Stadium with that huge main stand and the Bradford Park Avenue type doll's house opposite. It's a very distinctive ground. So, yeah, we'll see how they do. I would expect them to be lower mid-table if Chernyukin's reforms work out for them.
I would like them to get rid of the running track, John. I'm not a running track fan at all, I'm afraid, but that would basically be writing off about 10 stadia in the PPL. So it's not going to happen, is it? It's not going to happen. No. I can't believe, John, we've got halfway through our second episode without mentioning the most talked about team in the BPL last season, at least for the first 6 or 8 weeks, and that is, of course, Slutsk, who also, we did mention them last week in terms of the playoff, which they comfortably won against Krunkachi. But they also seem to be going down, understandably, after their financial problems last year. They also seem to be going down the more prudent avenue in terms of their signings. Would you not agree?
Looking at the two signings they've made so far, definitely. They've signed Sergei Glebko, who actually is quite good, one of Belshina's better players last season. He always showed up well in Belshina's games, big, powerful central midfielder. They also signed Smolovic's captain, who is called Edvard Zhevnerov, who looked alternately puzzled and horrified at the defence he was part of last season. Zhevnerov, we'll see how he does in a slightly better team, but I it's not someone I would have fallen over myself to sign, I must admit. But he was cheap, he was free, because all of Smolovic's players, of course, have been released. Now the club's defunct. I think Alexander Brazovic has been cautious. He's going to see who's available in the last few weeks of the season. Slutsk have only 15 signed players at the moment. They're certainly going to need a few more bodies in if they're going to make anything of it this season, and I do expect them to be bottom 4 again. Although I have to say, I like Brazovic as a coach. I like the way he tries to play football in the right way on the park and out in the flanks. And he seems to be a sort of patient and encouraging coach for younger players. So he might just be the perfect fit for Slutsk this season. Certainly they improved a lot when he took over from Konchets in October.
So as promised, we've decided this week to cover some of the lesser lights of the BPL. I hope that's okay with all of you. We obviously could easily have spent another 40 minutes talking about Shakhtar and Dinamo Brest-Terek. They will get mentioned later, I promise. But obviously, I think most people at this stage who are still following the BPL will be the kind of fans who are interested in all the developments that are going on in all parts of the table. So I hope that was a useful sort of roundup of some of the other teams, most of whom probably will finish mid to lower table. There is one glaring omission, though, isn't there, John? And we'd like sort of maybe at this point to just maybe call out, maybe extend an open invitation to the fans of Neman Grodno if anybody wants to come and tell us about what's going on there in our next show.
Absolutely. It would be great if one of Neyman's many UK followers got in touch with us on the Twitter account and wanted to come on Belpod 3 to talk about the club. After all, we don't want this podcast to be Liam and I like the Belarusian Stadler and Waldorf just talking amongst ourselves. So it'd be great if a Neyman fan wanted to come on and give their assessment of how they look back at last season and what they think of the players that have left and the new signings that they've made. So that would be an interesting chat if someone wants to do it.
So please get in touch. You know where to if you want to do that, then that would be great. And obviously, we're hoping in the weeks and months to come to involve a lot more of you in this. It's not, as you say, as John said, it's not really just about me and him. We'd love to have more contributions from others about anything that you're interested in talking about, as long as it's something related to Belarusian football. So we've talked about the have-nots, but we couldn't really, given that we're only a show every 2 weeks at the moment, we couldn't really let the last 2 weeks have passed without at least a brief mention of Moneybags Shakhtar blowing some more cash on on another forward, could we? We did mention him.
Yes.
We did mention that they might be signing him. We didn't really think they were going to spend quite that much money on him, though, did we?
Yeah, I mean, signing yet another Ford Transit minibuses worth of players in the last fortnight from Dubai. So that tells you that Shakhtar are not only in a different league, but probably a different universe to most of the teams that we've been talking about this evening. Look, they've signed Dembo Darbo, a Gambian forward from Shkupi in the North Macedonian top tier. I think I said last time I've spent quite a bit of time in Macedonia down the years, and it's not a good league. So Dembo Darbo's stats are impressive: 16 goals and 18 starts. A friend of mine who watches Macedonian football says he's very promising, but still very raw. So he's a lot of developing to do, and I hope that Shakhtar aren't looking to him to be the new Lisakovic, because he's going to need time to develop. It's a much bigger stage. It's a much tougher league. And I'm really interested to see how he gets on. They've also signed a Ukrainian forward, Roman Debelko, from Riga. He didn't have a great goal return, but I think they see him maybe as a second striker or someone to hold the ball up, So we'll see how those guys get on. But Dembo Darbo is one that's caused a lot of talk in Belarus, and I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on him when the season kicks off in the middle of March. He will be on big wages as well by Belarusian standards. And of course, this is a club that's owned by a company, many of whose employees are in strike, and they're really not happy at this money being thrown around in the times that Belarus as a country is going through at the moment. So they are an outlier. and we'll see how these signings do. But it's worth, just with the link up with Sputnik in mind, it's worth noting that I think last year they spent 450,000 euros on a player called Tine Vukmanic, who's never played or hardly featured and is now being punted to Sputnik. So they do have some very puzzling transfers there of players that never get a look in. So we're going to see how it all works out.
I presume that you when you said that Den Hazard will be in big money, you weren't referring to the £4,300.
I think it'll be quite a bit more than that. Yes.
How exactly will they get around that particular salary cap? Well, we know that we talked about it in the last show about sponsorships.
Exactly.
Turn up and meet the striking miners, and we'll give you an extra €2,000 a month or something.
Exactly.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, obviously, we those of you who followed recent developments at Dynamo / Rook will know that Rook have inevitably signed another couple of Dynamo's best players from last year. Both Kiki and Savitsky have been confirmed as new Rook players. Just all leaves a rather sour taste in the mouth, doesn't it, really, to be honest?
Yes, the MK Dons of Belarusian football signing yet more players from Dynamo. Pure Dynamo now have 9 signed players. And I don't know that they're going to get through licensing. The city council is still talking bullishly, and they have retained a couple of players who've pledged loyalty to Dynamo, but it's really looking bleak. I think they're going to be their pre-season games are going to be largely youth players. But yes, Rook now have an incredibly strong squad. A dozen of those players were at Dynamo last season. They've also signed a player from the Ecuadorian league. I think Nicola or Facundo, we're not quite sure. Queiroz. There's a bit of confusion as to which Queiroz they've signed, but he looks to be an interesting player, central midfielder or attacking midfielder. So we'll see how he shapes up in the league.
I mean, much as we don't particularly like the asset stripping that's gone on between Dynamo and Rook, I mean, obviously, I suppose Zaitsev formerly, owned both clubs, and I presume he's told all the ex-Dynamo players that they can come across and play to Rook and have their contracts honoured and still get a decent wage, so that's why they've done it. We can't discount them, can we, really? We did say last week we felt very much that it was a two-horse race. Given that they've signed pretty much the entire Dynamo side that finished in the top 4 last year, we've got to think that they may well now have a serious chance of competing with those two. But also, I think the team would be most impressed with, and we did mention them 2 weeks ago as a team that perhaps missed their chance last season. I think Yuri Puntas and Torpedo seem to have gone away over the last few weeks and decided, well, if we did just miss out last time, let's make absolutely sure we have a real go at it this time. And I think they're the team perhaps that's most caught our eye in the last couple of weeks.
Well, they've had an amazing week's transfer business, haven't they, Torpedo? They've brought back Lipe Veloso, which frankly at the turn of the year looked a real long shot. They've signed Dmitry Antilevsky again, despite the fact that Antilevsky had big offers in the Russian league. They've signed his wee brother, who's also a midfielder, who's only 18, but one for the future, obviously. They've signed Kirill Kirilenko from Olympic Donetsk. So that's a really impressive week's business. And I have to say, it's a real testament to Yuri Puntus. I mean, what a career the guy's had. And he's obviously an extremely humane coach that players really want to play for. I think the most interesting article I've read since our last podcast was with the centre half, Samuel Odiobo, the Nigerian player who was with Belshina last season. You might remember Odiobo sort of shouting in an appalled manner as yet another gruesome blunder led to Belshina conceding, or, Sergei Turanok's latest gaff dump, seeing the ball trickle into the net. But Odiobo is really good friends with Puntus, who has really helped the guy when he knew nobody in Belarus. He helped him with money. He helped him with coaching to find a club. And he's now there doing pre-season at Torpedo and probably will get signed as a squad player. He'll come on for the odd game. He's a useful guy to have around the place. But I think just the story of that friendship in that article really revealed a lot to me about Puntus's character. And it's no surprise to me at all that these players he signed want to play for him, even if it's for a bit less money than they could potentially earn elsewhere. And I do agree with you. I think Rook are definitely title contenders. Torpedo, I would put as dark horses. And with these players, the advantage they have in all the other teams, the other three that are in for the title, is they pretty much had a season together already. The only guy that's left really is Gabi Ramos, who's away to Riga. But all these guys have been part of a team for a year and they know one another. And there's a team bond there. And that's a little advantage they have over the relatively new squads that particularly Shakhtar and Rook have put together.
So that's been some obviously doom and gloom surrounding the whole money situation and certainly the Krumkachi situation in this particular episode. But we've got to the end of it. We're suddenly thinking there might be at least 4 or 5 teams that are in with a shout of the title this season. I think that's a remarkable testament in a way, really, isn't it? To a league that many people before we started watching it were used to seeing Barté win every year, and all of a sudden, more to do with Barté's relative demise, I suppose, than all these other teams suddenly becoming much better. We suddenly have a season to really, really look forward to. I think overshadowed by certain aspects of what's going on in Belarus, and also teams that are clearly desperately short of money and they're not sure they might get through the season. But there is clearly some excitement to be had again this year, and I think we joined at a wonderful time with a wonderful climax to the last season, and I think we may well get a really great season again this year.
It's certainly shaping up that way. I think the title race will be really compelling between these 4 teams. Who's your 5th team, Liam, out of interest?
I know we've written off Barté. I know you said last week you think they'll be 7th or 8th. I don't think they'll be serious contenders, but I do think that if people get off his back and he's just left to get on with it, I think there's still an aura about Barté to a certain extent. I think it's very different, isn't it, to be favourites, and to have a lot of pressure and a lot of experienced players who kind of, not saying they went through the motions, but some of them certainly underperformed last year. Some of the players were a lot better than they showed themselves to be on a regular basis. A younger team, I really do rate Nosko very highly. I think he could be a massive player for them this year. I think, as with Torpedo, I suppose goals would be a bit of a worry, but then they scored 4 the other day against Slutsk. I know it's only pre-season, but I don't know. I wouldn't write Barté off at all. I think that I don't expect to win it, but I do expect them to beat a few of those top 4 on occasion on their day.
Yeah, they could well, and of course Zhukovsky could. I think he's quite a Mourinho type performer with the media. He likes to provoke the media and needle them as a way of drawing attention to himself and away from his players. And he knows exactly when to do that. And he's been in that kind of spiky defensive mode already, which has been interesting to watch. I agree with you, Nosko's a fine player. Umarov will develop in time. Maxim Skavish hasn't gone yet. And they're getting money. I mean, they sold Bojan Nastic to Jagiellonia for 350,000. They've already got money in from the sale of other players. So they do have money. The worry for Bata is what happens next season when they've sold everybody that they can raise money from, So this is a critical season for them. I don't think they'll win the title or be anywhere near it. I do think they'll be mid-table, but you're right. On their day, they'll be capable of giving any one of the top 4 a very hard game, and indeed.
Fascinating times, fascinating season ahead of us. As we mentioned earlier on, we'd love to get more of you involved. So if you fancy making a guest appearance on a subsequent show, please get in touch with us. In the meantime, take care.
Yeah, take care. Good to have you with us, and see you next time.